Welcome to Journey to Joy Live, a podcast to promote wellness, resilience, and inspire joy. Be empowered to balance your mental, physical, financial, aspirational, and social health while providing mental health awareness and breaking down the stigma of mental illness in the Black community. I'm your host, Dr. If Joy, and I'm here to help you transform life's challenges into opportunities for joy. Let's begin the journey together. Hello, episode 105, Rest, Rage, and Radical Joy, Black Wellness in a World That Won't Let Us Breathe. And I have special guest, Dr. Sierra Carter, Associate Professor in Clinical Community Psychology at GSU. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for coming. And so tell us more about you.
Yeah, so I am an associate professor, like it says, in clinical and community psychology. And I study a lot about Black people living the lives that they deserve and having the ability to live long and thriving lives. I always say I started out trying to understand why Black people die younger than everybody else. And then I've kind of found my way of trying to understand ways in which we support the wellness, the journey, the love, care that Black people deserve to live those long lives. So that's my whole trajectory in both research and clinical practice. And really, I think the heart-driven work that leads me to feel that I am doing the work that I, was set here on earth to do. So I'm very happy to be talking about this topic today. It very much aligns with the work that I want to continue to do for the people that I love and care about.
For sure. And I met you at the Black Psychiatrists of America. We had a conference in Atlanta and you were doing a talk during our lunch. And I was just like, oh my goodness, you were mentioning like radical joy and how to experience rest in the face of racism. I'm like, yes, because anything joy talk and resistance and going against the grain, I want you here. And, a lot of people say, they're like, well, joy, how can I experience joy if I'm being oppressed and discriminated against, microaggressions and all those things? So hopefully your research has helped people be able to get through that. And, I always talk about joy is work and it's difficult. So I can only imagine like when you're questioning about why do Black people not live as long? I mean, it has to do with all the stress, right? I mean, what have you found so far?
Yes, I mean, it does. It has to do a lot with chronic stress and the naming of racial injustice as a part of that chronic stress trajectory and how it wears and tears down body regulatory systems. And so I really focus on the naming part of understanding what's happening and then listening. So, I listen to Black people's journeys, and when I'm studying processes that lead to what we call things like accelerated aging processes.
Oh, wow.
I'm thinking about what all can be included in chronic stressors that we disproportionately affect our experience as Black people. And in a lot of literatures, racism is not included in that chronic stress literature. And particularly, we thought our children were protected from that type of experience for a very long time in our research literature. That is actually sadly not true.
Yeah.
So we know over the lifespan that this chronic stress of racism in all its forms, including when we experience disproportionately trauma as Black people, that embedded within societal experiences of injustice exacerbates our effects on our inflammatory body regulatory systems, leading to chronic disease progression. But as a clinical psychologist, I often think about like what that aligns with. And so a lot of my work has been understanding the interconnection of the mind and the body. Right. So when I experience things like racism, how does my mind interpret that? And for some kids, one of the things I found, Black kids in particular, that includes depression, right? What does it mean to experience a chronic stressor like racism that thinks of my Blackness as lesser than, and then have to live in a world that thinks of me as lesser than, and that can lead to lack of hope, lack of joy, lack of wellness, and then these depressive symptoms that are all aligning with those types of feelings, lack of self-esteem. And that in turn leads to accelerated aging processes that doesn't let us live as long. So these things are so interconnected with each other. They're not separate.
Yeah.
a lot of my work journey of saying like we need to understand these chronic stressors that affect both our mind and body to think about ways in which we can think about solutions that are culturally invested in Black people living longer lives.
For sure. And I love how you're talking about the body process because we got Independence Day coming up. We just had
Mhm.
Juneteenth. And on Juneteenth, Dr. Nagar Fani was talking
Mhm.
about how racial trauma actually affects our brain. So now we're talking about how that goes through and it affects our body. So, what is the process of how it will affect our body?
I tend to explain it in terms of like when we experience things that are very stressful. As an example, for example, if I was to see a bear right now, right, our body has a natural reaction, right, to protect itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our body goes into this fear response,
Fight or
right?
flight mode.
Yeah, right. And so we're trying to protect ourselves from a legitimate danger.
Mm-hmm.
Our body responds in a way of being hypervigilant, it might
Yeah.
freeze, and that all is a part of our body regulatory systems. Our eyes
Mm-hmm.
dilate, our heart races, our fingers might sweat. And that influences a process of trying to survive a difficult experience. When it comes
Exactly.
to chronic stress, so
Ooh.
I like to say the bear isn't leaving.
Mm-hmm.
Then our body is not able to calm down and notice that that fear is no longer there. And that's what leads to what we call allostatic load, right? Our
Oh.
body is constantly on high guard, right? We're trying to look out for these fears, and our body isn't able to calm down in the ways that it deserves. And I think about that when we're thinking about hypervigilance to racism, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Feel like there's something that could happen daily to us, whether that is on the internet, whether that is interpersonally with people that we work with, whether that is in the parties that we go to. That
Yeah.
if we feel that that's happening, our body isn't able to calm down, or if we're
Yeah.
past events that were very traumatic to us,
Mhm.
not able to calm down from thinking about it. Our body is still not able to calm down. Our body takes the score of that.
Not able to rest.
How I think about that of the necessity to
Mhm.
allow our body to regulate itself. Because if we don't, those types of processes can lead to the chronic diseases that we see in our community, including things like
Yeah.
hypertension, diabetes,
Mhm.
heart attacks,
Yep.
even chronic things like fibromyalgia, we're finding are related
Mm.
chronic illnesses and chronic stressors. So it's so important to really address the root causes of these of the stress in order to think about what we can do to offset that toll.
Yeah, so we can actually treat it. Yeah. And, when it comes to chronic stress, that keeps us in that sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight mode. And we're not supposed to stay in that fight or flight mode. It's supposed to be just briefly while we're getting away. And if that bear is just going to stay there, then that's that chronic stress. And just hearing you say that, and I know it can sound like a naive question, you can kind of wonder if the bear is staying there so long, we can't just get used to the bear. But I know that's not the case because
Mhm.
it's just this constant trauma. Like if you think of somebody like, we're not talking about even racial trauma, we're talking about an abuser that you're just constantly in that. No, the person don't get used to it. And if they do get used to it, it's detrimental for them to think that they need to be in this, or getting used to discrimination at work, or getting used to discrimination wherever they are. So I don't think there's any getting used to it.
There isn't, but we do. So some of the research that I've been doing has been kind of taking ourselves away from kind of these white-centered, Eurocentric framings of what allostatic load looks like, and I specifically
Okay.
focus on Black womanhood.
Mm-hmm.
There's this term called adaptive calibration
Oh.
that was named by Black scholars who focus on what it means to live in an environment that has disproportionate adversity and trauma within it.
Mm-hmm.
Happens to be that Black disproportionately experience. And what our body
Mm-hmm.
does is it calibrates itself. So it says, in order to survive, what do I need to do in order to make sure that my body stays safe?
Mm-hmm.
That circumstance.
Okay.
So there are some strength-based processes that Black people have done in the
Oh.
face of racial injustice, including, I like to think of it as you're picking up on cues that are unsafe. So
Yeah.
our mind and body are able to pick up on unsafe environments, right? I know when the police are around the corner. I know, like, our body is able to pick up on those cues of unsafety.
Yeah.
And then it's also coming with the cost, right? Our
Yeah.
body is on this dysregulation. So what we're seeing is, for example, even with some of Dr. Nagar Funny's work, what we saw was that even in those brain scans, Black women
Mm-hmm.
do a task where they had to pick up on threat relevant cues, right?
Yeah.
The Black women weren't making mistakes on picking up the threat,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
They were making those mistakes. Why? Because they're calibrating to be able to pick up on the threat in their environment.
Okay, which is good to pick up on it.
But that takes a toll on our brain, right? Having to constantly be on guard,
That
constantly.
hypervigilance.
Yes. So
That's not
it takes
good.
a toll. And so my thought is, yes, on some parts, we want to do our own healing, but I also work a lot with thinking about the systematic practice of embedding Black people in spaces that are unsafe and what systems need to do to alleviate that distress.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, this is some good stuff. Because yeah, it's like we're getting used to it, but at the same time, it takes a toll because we shouldn't be high
Yeah.
on guard so so long. So, what are some details about your research that you found that would be good for what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, in the work I've done over time, I
Hmm.
feel that people have the language that is given to them to describe what's happening to them.
Yeah.
So my job is to utilize the stories that Black people use to dismantle these narratives, to think
Mm.
about healing and joy in a radical way.
Hmm.
Give that language, right?
Yeah.
Things that we're already doing that counteract the racial injustice that is experienced for disproportionately for Black people. And
Hmm.
often that involves using theoretical frameworks that are indigenous in nature that we talk about often, right?
Hmm.
There are radical healing frameworks that I utilize, liberation psychology, that focuses on what does it mean for our bodies to be able to have a space that totally focus on rest and relaxation,
Yeah.
totally involves embedding ourselves in the strengths of our Blackness and beauty,
Hmm.
and the joy of who we are as a people and the ancestral wisdom that comes from that knowledge of who our ancestors were to, despite the odds, to still be here. Like those types of enriching practices we are finding constantly are reducing the effects of these chronic
Oh,
stressors
nice.
livelihood.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, our literature doesn't embed itself in kind of Black centric forms of joy and healing.
Yeah.
I tend to think healing is different from coping. Coping is usually kind of this individualistic nature of what I'm individually going to practice.
Yeah.
Healing is more this revolutionary act where I involve community in my healing journey
Mm.
and I holistically heal myself, my mind and
Get
body.
beyond it.
Right. So it's a liberation practice
Hmm.
that Black people have been doing for centuries. And I think because we live in a
Yes.
society that's capitalist and
Hmm.
white centric, we often are always on the go. We're always having to work. We're always in this
Trying
kind
to
of
be resilient.
big resilient, right? That language, being a
Mhm.
strong Black woman in the face of all these,
Ah.
right? But this radical act of saying, I deserve rest, I deserve joy, I deserve freedom, right? I deserve liberation in the face of oppression is a radical act in itself. And so I tend to use these healing frameworks in a radical
Mhm.
way to say, we want to focus on the things that we know for Black people specifically leads to rejuvenation and wellness to live longer, more thriving lives.
We definitely need that. I mean, there's the people who are focusing on themselves and their own family unit. Let's focus on stress relief. Let's focus on wellness. Then, of course, there's the people that feel their anger into advocacy. Let's try to change so that we will end racism somehow, and that can be more stressful because it's like, ooh, expectations. But, this is the question you asked during your talk. I mean, what does rest look like for Black people in the face of racism? And I took some notes. You mentioned something about critical consciousness, radical healing and hope, and resistance strategies. I was like, okay, resistance
Yeah.
strategies. So tell us more about those.
Yeah, and this literature is not my own. So this is by Dr. French, Dr. Helen Neville, a number of Black scholars who have been focusing on learning about radical healing frameworks from Black people. And one of the things we know across the lifespan is having an understanding about self, which is we can consider critical consciousness. Allows the space to understand what the root causes of things are and how you need to engage in practices that help you heal. And rest is a part of that.
Oh, yes.
And often we think about these things, right? You talked about activism, right? As this one-off thing that people utilize. But what we know is that people use abundance of strategies.
Mm-hmm.
So I might go out to a protest and I might go see my therapist, right?
Yeah.
And so often we kind of think about these things as dialectic, but what we know about Black people is we utilize strategies that we know are helpful for us, and then some that might not be as adaptive as we would like. And so radical healing gives us the space to say critical consciousness is important, but radical healing is also about radical hope.
Yeah.
Radical hope meaning that I not only think about hope for my own future, but I think about the hope for my community in the future and the hope for maybe my offspring that I haven't met yet.
Mm-hmm.
Self brings a kind of revolutionary way of thinking about what is possible, even when we can't see it in our direct line of vision. And that in itself is combating things like depression, radical existence of saying, what do I hope for the people that I love and care about? And how do I envision that for them?
Yeah.
And how do I move myself to align with that practice?
Mm-hmm.
And then within those strategies, again, that self-knowledge and acceptance and cultural authenticity that are part of this radical healing framework is involved in a space of communal rest. So communal rest means that I, as an academic, I want to create the space where Black people can come together and rest, right?
Oh, yes.
And be their authentic selves. Enjoy the experience of testimony, because we know also that testimony can be helpful. The narratives of our experiences that is validated, not dismissed.
Validation.
Part of this rejuvenation of learning about what's happening to other people that's also potentially happening to us, and say, okay, we deserve this massage. We deserve, to have this is a day to take a day out of work if we have the possibility to do that, because of all the things that we've been through that we validate as a chronic stressor.
For sure.
Often the spaces that we are in don't allow for that rest and relaxation that is holistically related to our Blackness, means for us. And so our goal in our lab is to create those spaces of community, provide the funding as we have it, so that people can create that space themselves, and we can create it in practice to see if it is related to optimal wellness. And we think about optimal wellness, like I said, again, of this mind-body reaction. We ask people how they have healed. And we have found that people who also talk about it as well as rest, so this dialectic, right? You engage in these talking practice, you also find spaces where you can breathe.
Yes.
Breathe in, take these mindfulness-based practices, but not solo only mindfulness, right? But having the space to breathe in a space where you feel like you can't. Those types of radical practices against the oppression are the ways in which we think people are moving that are showing to be signs of resistance.
Gotcha.
As well as rest.
Yeah. So finding those spaces, I mean, whether it's alone or whether it's with community, I mean, that's what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, like finding that social connectedness, being around people like you, like-mindedness. I mean, we've been doing that for years. I mean, as far as being around people so we can have that validation. But yeah, knowing yourself, recognizing your reactions to things. And I love how you mentioned hope. When I hear hope, I think of faith and gratitude and all those things. And I also think for those out there, Christians, the scene about Jesus sleeping so peacefully in the midst of a storm on a ship. And
Mhm.
it's like, I think that's what we want to gain, right? Because we cannot end the storm. We really can't. We can't control the weather, but we can control how we react. So
Exactly.
we can be at peace, and joy can come from within if we take the time to work at it. It takes work, but you can
Yes.
do it.
Yes. I think that is a part of how we think about the combination of healing and also resistance. I will say, oftentimes, a thought that I hear from other scholars is this thought that we don't approach the system, we just focus on ourselves.
Hmm.
But we actually, in the liberation psychology, as well as the radical healing framework, is that across generations, we have felt the need and necessity to think about our healing in the space of resisting oppression.
Yeah.
So, like, the journey is the combo. Is actually what we're understanding as this holistic wellness is if we dismiss the necessity to think about resistance to oppression, then we don't feel as whole as we want to be.
Hmm.
A sense of like, I'm missing a part of what this is because this was unjust, right? What
Hmm.
happened to me and my family,
Yeah.
my community is unjust. And often we feel this desire to do something about it. And that desire is not neglecting the rest you need. And I think oftentimes we think you
Uh,
should only do one thing and just kind of
you
move
can
along.
actually do both.
I should push through. I should not resist. I should not stand up for myself. And actually, our literature doesn't show that. It actually shows the
Mm.
is really important.
Yeah.
I like to tell people I would caution against this framing of like,
Hmm.
take care of self, take care of holistic wellness. That's all important. I'm not saying
Yeah.
those things, but it's okay to resist depression. That is all about what liberation is
Well, I
like.
feel like rest is resisting oppression.
You find the combination intangible.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, oh, should I say something about this unjust act? And sometimes people are like, well, take a day off. And I was like, it's okay. But it's also okay to resist.
Oh, I definitely see what you're saying because I definitely avoid those political type of
Mhm.
conversations, and my algorithm doesn't have all that because I'm looking at toddlers, I'm laughing, I look for all the fun, joyful
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
So yeah, I do avoid those
yeah.
conversations for my mental health. So I do see how people could think like you only do the one, but what you're saying is like, sure, you can engage in those intellectual conversations or debates, but you can also rest. Just
Yeah,
don't do 100%.
everything. Yeah,
Yeah.
only solely. I think it's the more, we like to call it psychological flexibility.
Oh, yeah.
The more tools you have in your toolbox to resist oppression, the more holistically well you can be.
Love it.
One fits all thought
Mhm, mhm.
often does not fit every form of oppression. So, like, we might have only experienced one thing and then we're hit with something and we're like, I don't have enough in my toolbox to deal with that. I was trying to rest. I
You
was
need a
trying
lot.
to like take a relaxation moment. That's not doing it enough.
Mhm. For
And so we
sure.
need a lot more psychological flexibility to have a number of things in our
Ooh, a
toolbox.
lot of people need that. A lot of people are just so fixed and rigid. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, you gotta be more flexible. That's so sure, so true. So you mentioned offspring that you haven't met yet earlier, and that made me think about people who are like, I'm not gonna have kids in this world, this evil, angry world. And of course, we talk about how hard it is. You have a black boy, I have three black boys, and how hard it is to raise black men in this society. What do you say to people? I guess it's two different concepts, but what do you say to people who are just like, I'm not bringing no kids in this world?
I mean, I think that's real. I mean, I'll be honest. I think about that all the time.
Dr. Carter validates you, whoever thinks that.
I do. I mean, I do, but I do think that this radical hope is so important for me too, personally, right? Like this envisioning of a future for the people I love and care about. I wouldn't be doing this work if I didn't think that I had hope that
Yeah.
things could change.
Mhm.
Black people could live longer lives, right? And that
Yeah.
thought about kids like being in a better world
Yeah.
than I am currently sitting in.
Mhm.
I tend to think about that when I'm thinking about the future generations.
Mhm.
What world could I help to co-create where I would feel that this is the space that I want to live? Am I moving in those ways that is centered in that thought? And I think that changes my perspective on kind of future generations, because I see hope every day.
Yeah. It's
Oftentimes,
there. You got to look for it or find it or create it.
if we have these glasses on of like the world is completely terrible, there's nothing, it's going to be hard to see any hope that is happening, but I see every day, and the people that I work with and the communities that I partner with, all of these things that I'm talking about, the joy, the Black beauty, the beauty and community, the rest practices.
Yeah.
And that, being able to view that gives me hope for future offsprings. And I think I caution against kind of being in one space or the other completely. We have to identify the struggle,
Yes.
but also understand the joy that comes from being who we are. And so
Yes.
I think that joy of being who I am as a Black person deserves to be shared. And that's kind of how I think through.
Unapologetically.
And so I think that's a part of thinking about the future offspring.
I mean, that's why that psychological flexibility that you spoke about is so important. Like, you have to be able to think two ways. Like, something could be very stressful, but also it's okay to laugh about it. It's okay to be hopeful, even though something sucks. Like the current president, a lot of us were not happy. We were looking for our first Black female president, and a lot of people were just extremely angry. What did I do? I created a funny reel. I'm just like, well, at least my loans were forgiven before he became president, because that's just how I deal. And humor is a mature defense mechanism. So I think if we can laugh about stuff, that's great. Laughing is healing to the soul. It is okay to laugh.
Yeah, that's a beautiful, flexible strategy. I love it.
Because some people take life so seriously, and I think it's okay to just give permission not to take life so seriously. I laugh with my patients, even patients. I feel like that's a nice scale for how depressed they are that day. If I can make them laugh, I'm like, okay, you're not as depressed today.
I know.
You don't laugh, then I'm like, oh shoot, let's up your dose.
There's a lot going on.
Right. Yeah. So this is great. So as far as radical joy, what does radical joy look like when joy itself feels like resistance? And we say joy is resistance. So like, how do we do it?
Yeah, I think joy and freedom are aligned with each other, kind of in kind of Black holistic wellness practice, in that happiness is innate, and trying to build something that's not there can be a difficult practice. So I tend to tell people, like, what brings you joy? What brings you joy, and what deterred it for you for today? So often when I think about kind of Black people and joy practices as someone who studies racism, and that can ruin your joy, right? I could be going along having a beautiful day. I practice joy and like centering my child this morning and like seeing the world through his eyes and how beautiful that was. That brought me so much joy. And then somebody had to call me out of my name, and that deterred the joy that I had. And so when you get to a space, radical joy is saying, above and beyond these daily practices that bring me joy, what are the things that I see in my, community, amongst my family, amongst people I love and care about, that I can see as bringing joy for all? So there's a combination, again, of practices where I have the things that I can identify that bring me joy, but those individual practices can often be offset by these experiences of oppression, right? It can often be my joy for the day. And so you need these kind of broader, joyful practices, right? That can be my church family, that can be how I think about community, how I think about future joy for my child, right? Envisioning that act, because I might not have it all on that day. But I can say, oh, my baby is having a great day today, right?
Yes.
That brings me so much joy, even if I'm not in the moment when something terrible is happening to me.
Yes, there's always something.
And so that is an allowance of kind of thinking about, that's what radical joy is about. It's about thinking about not only my own personal joys that sadly sometimes can be offset by personal oppression or different types of things that happen to us on a daily
If
that
something
are
happens,
stressful,
yeah.
but this radical joy that even in the midst of struggle, there are things that I see in the world that are beautiful and worth giving respect to and thinking about and really enriching my life.
Yeah, and we have to identify those things, early on so that we can have a nice list, a toolkit to look at so
Mhm.
that when oppression or stress or trauma happens and you're just like, because when that happens, you don't remember any of these positive little joys
Exactly.
or big joys or nothing. So when you have it written down, you can go back to it or you know what your self-care practice is. And if you're doing something every day, it's consistent, it's something you need to do. But sometimes in that face of stress, you need like to up your game, your self-care game, and there's something else you have to do. But just hearing you talk about like the joy, like some of the joys of parenting, like I had a little small joy today. Usually when I tell my 4-year-old to go brush his teeth, he's just like, Mommy, can you come with me? Mommy, can you come with me? And this morning he's just like, Mommy, I don't need you.
Ooh.
And it sounds like, whoa, you don't need me. But then I was like, whoa, wait, stop. That's a joy. He doesn't need me.
Yeah.
Help him brush his teeth.
Oh, that is beautiful. Look at this little independent child.
Exactly. So that's so cool. So it's just like there's just like little joy because parenting can be a joy and a stress. So you got to find your parenting joys when you
Biggest combination, right? of things.
right. So like for people who avoid politics and avoid those things like in order to keep their joy. I mean, well, you already mentioned it. You said, the psychological flexibility, it's good to like trickle it in here and there. But is it okay to just not watch the news?
Yes. I tend to think about this from, there's a article, op-ed that was called Breathe, Baby, Breathe.
Uh-huh.
The thought was like this idea of, this was when George Floyd was murdered, and we saw
Mm.
screaming nonstop this murder, and this idea that we have to engage in watching the destruction of Black bodies constantly doesn't make any
I
sense.
couldn't do it. I couldn't do it.
Right?
Mm-mm.
And so I don't even call it avoidance. I call it
Protection.
a protective wellness practice of disengaging from a system that we don't see these types of images for white bodies, right? So there is an intentionality to the ways that people paint pictures of Black people's destruction. And so
Mhm.
that type of disengagement strategy is what I would name it. It's
Mhm.
actually a part of the wellness journey, right? I'm disengaging from that form of oppression. Now, do I think critical consciousness in line with that is knowing that these things are happening to the people that I love? Doesn't mean I need to watch a video every day to know that. Right.
Exactly. Why do I need to expose myself?
Not. And we actually know the research literature is very clear. We call it vicarious racism. So even if it's
Mm.
not something that I personally experienced, but I see someone on the TV screen that looks like me who has been experienced police brutality, has been murdered by the police. Those types of experience, we can look at it by state. So in Minnesota, for example, when George Floyd was murdered, we saw an uptick in Black people's depression and anxiety scores
Oh,
to other
wow.
ethnicities. So we know that this vicarious trauma, vicarious racial trauma,
Yes.
has an effect on our
Of
bodies,
course.
even if it's not our own personal experience. This witnessing
Or a
is
family, even if it's not a family member, like we feel it. We get
feeling.
angry. There's this communal anger.
Exactly. And it's affecting our holistic wellness. And so
Yeah.
this way of disengaging is not a bad practice. It's a
Yeah.
way of protection, like you mentioned, of being able to
Mhm.
save ourselves and breathe despite seeing and witnessing these injustices and oppression. Doesn't mean the next day we aren't going to say something or
Yeah.
talk about it or think through it. Doesn't mean we have to see those images every day.
Yeah, you can't expose yourself. And I mean, I say all the time as a psychiatrist, I really have to protect my mind because definitely mental health professionals have to deal with combating the vicarious trauma on a day-to-day basis. Like there's certain ones that like stick to me to this day that I've heard like several years ago about somebody's trauma. But other traumas, I've kind of trained my brain like, okay, I got this. I'm
Mhm.
good. Or, I know what to do in order to not let it affect me. But like watching somebody like a for real person die on TV, can't do it. And was it Eric Garner who he was I Can't Breathe, and that
Exactly.
was played over and over again. It's just like, but yeah, I mean, Black Lives Matter came out of all this. So, that's that anger to advocacy
Yeah,
that
I think there's just this sweet spot that we're learning a lot more about
yeah.
research because Erica Garner, Eric Garner's daughter, was a significant advocate in the pursuit of justice for her father. But she died prematurely giving birth to her son, Eric.
Oh God.
And we are seeing more and more cases of relatives to these police harms
Uh-huh.
having significant chronic health complications and even sadly
Oh,
dying
wow.
with these big cases that we see in our media, which I think
Mm.
gives us a sign that, we think of these as interwoven lives, right? And the stress of our family members, the
Mhm.
oppression of our family members, the ways in which we engage in these resistance strategies. This is not saying that wasn't important for her to do, but it
Right.
come with a cost, just like other things that we talk
Oh.
come with a cost, right? And then we have to think about like what's going to give us the most holistic wellness despite oppression. And sometimes when we go so hard with one
Mhm.
strategy,
Uh,
that lead to some of our health decline. And so we have
wow.
those tools.
Oh,
Because,
that's deep.
yeah.
And she already had the numbers against her anyway because of the Black mortality rate of Black women in childbirth. Oh, Lord. Yeah. That's a really good example. As hard as it sounds, that's a really good example of how chronic stress, chronic trauma, chronic oppression can affect the Black community. So it's a matter of us acknowledging, being aware, knowing yourself, being intentional about your self-care strategies and your wellness. If you need to see a therapist, go see a therapist. If you
Mhm.
got chronic anger, it's just every day depressed, you can't find no joy, that's a sign to get professional help, and it is okay.
Is okay. And I think it's a part of your wellness journey, right? That is
Yeah.
radical rest.
Mhm.
And taking care of yourself and acknowledging I need additional tools is a part of liberation psychology. Like I'm liberating myself from this idea that
Mhm.
I got to push through despite all the things that I've been through or I'm seeing.
Yeah.
It's not the language of our ancestors. The language of our ancestors is you deserve to be liberated and free.
Mhm. Mhm.
And if you're not experiencing that, you're not experiencing the things that our Black ancestors wanted for us. And they saw this radical hope and joy
They
for us.
fought for this.
And they wanted that for us. And I think it's our right to deserve to live within that truth.
Yes, yes, for sure. Well, thank you. So I ask all my guests what their personal journey to joy has been like. Can you tell us about that?
I mean, we've been talking about parenting and babies. I mean, I I am a little obsessed, but not all the way obsessed with my child and transforming my ability to reflect on the joy of life. Like I think my life has been so enriched by having a son who
Oh.
sees the beauty of life and livelihood and the simple things, right? Like now his favorite word is wow,
Oh, that's so cute.
or you see, and when he says you see, I'm like, oh, I see that, baby, but I wasn't paying attention to that. I wasn't paying attention to that truck. I wasn't paying attention to that bird. But it creates this mindfulness practice of like, yes, the world is beautiful.
They help you, the little innocent pills.
No, and it brings it. That is my practice of joy daily. Is
That's
trying
amazing.
to kind of sit and seeing the world through his eyes and being able to see the joy that he finds brings me the most joy too. Of like, oh, that is a beautiful image. Oh, it is a different way of viewing
Oh,
this
that's so
museum
dope.
that I've seen a million times, but not through your eyes.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, although parenting can be stressful, it's definitely a joy, like I said. And like these kids are obsessed with me. I come home, I go pick them up, they're, Mom, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, oh, I feel like a god. Yeah, so that's where your joy comes from for sure. Oh my goodness. So where can we find you? Let's see, we got your website. I know you're on LinkedIn by your name. Here's your website, drsierracarter.com. Yes, I really appreciate you. And like you said, you're on LinkedIn at
Yes,
Sierra Carter. And just to talk more about my book that I recently published, Inspire Joy for the Wife, Mom, Boss, Balancing It All Without Losing Yourself. It is $17.49 on drenjoylife.com. If you want to know how to balance being everything to everyone at all times. And the Enjoyno Nurturing Authentic Living is a journal that helps you balance your mental, physical, financial, aspirational, and social health. We're talking about all this radical joy in the face of stress, oppression, and trauma, and all the things. You definitely want to get yourself an Enjoyno. And that too is on Dr. Enjoy Life for $35 and get both for $45, the Joy Bundle. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. And thank you, Dr. Carter.
Thank you. It was such a joy. Appreciate it.
This has been an Enjoy Life production. If you're in a crisis, don't hesitate. Call, text, or chat 988 for immediate support. Please note, this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional treatment. If you're looking for therapy or medication management through Enjoy Life, visit www.drenjoylife.com to request a consultation. I'm licensed in 12 states. I accept Aetna in Georgia, Florida, and Virginia. Be sure to grab your copy of the Enjoyno to help you on your wellness journey. Also check out Inspire Joy for the Wife, Mom, Boss to help you balance it all without losing yourself. Better yet, get the full Joy Bundle for just $45. Remember, Journey to Joy Live is every Thursday at 7 p.m. Thank you for joining me, and until next time, may you continue to transform stress into joy.